From Kansas State University, this is Agriculture Today. Eric Atkinson with you. Standing by, K-State's Dan O'Brien to comment on the USDA's Outlook Forum projections on wheat, corn, and soybean acreage in 2021, and how those will likely figure into the grain market trends moving forward. Then K-State's Romulo Lollato offering his observations on this past week's polar-like temperatures across Kansas and the ensuing chances for winterkill in the winter wheat crop. He'll take a look at the soil temperature threshold that indicates a possible winterkill problem and how planting date will likely figure into that as well. And we'll recap just how cold it was when K-State's Mary Knapp is along to talk Kansas agricultural weather. Further ahead on this Agriculture Today.
Kansas farmers and ranchers are helping feed your family in the world. The largest contributor to the Kansas economy is beef cattle. How do you get that juicy steak on your plate? In order for you to enjoy your tasty meal, it requires the hard work of the producers, marketers, advertisers, processors, inspectors, transporters, packers, and consumers. So thank all these people and sit back, relax, and enjoy your tasty meal.
You are tuned in to Agriculture Today. As always, it's good to have you listening in on this Friday. Well, the USDA has offered up some new numbers for the grain markets to consider in the form of its Outlook Forum, which started yesterday, continues today. This is an annual occasion, and it does crank out quite some information. We will key on that and other things concerning the grain markets now as we visit once more with grain market economist, K-State Research and Extension, Dan O'Brien. First, though, to note, Dan, you're fresh off a trip to southwest Kansas where you participated and helped lead a K-State grain sorghum workshop with a pretty fair turnout of producers.
Yes, in a socially distanced manner, of course,
right.
And taking adequate precautions. We had a meeting in Hugoton. Myself, representatives from the seed industry, and other folks were talking about limited irrigation grain sorghum. And of course, I talked about some about marketing, but also maybe the bigger issue probably is trying to figure out what the irrigated yield capacity is for a crop. And we're starting with the presumption that it's limited irrigation. So we're looking at 5 inches to 9 to maybe 10 being available. And in looking at some research that Lucas Haig, Alan Schlegel had done in the past and updating yields with the type of yield growth we'd expect, you end up ranging on the low side from about 121 up to on the high side to about 150, 55, something like that for yields, and running in the budgets. By the time we got the consensus of the room, we were looking at grain sorghum at 5 inches in addition to rainfall at about 121 or so, at 9 inches with rainfall about 140, 145, and then with about 12 inches, if a person had that much available, then just following the type of water to yield functions that you have, it would seem that grain sorghum with that much water could get up to 150, 160, something like that for yields. And of course, with ideal conditions, it goes way higher, but assuming regular conditions, that. So we went through that, worked out in kind of a focus group manner. These 25 regular ag producers they made a pretty good focus group, actually. Lots of opinions. One thing that they know, a lot of them, is that, insecticide, about $20 an acre. Fertilizer, go with this. Seed, yeah, that's about right. And one thing that I found really interesting in that group was to hear them talk about row spacings at 30-inch rows. Yes, we can do very good at that, but to consider, this is more coming out of Texas and Oklahoma, to consider drilling or a double planter at about 15-inch rows to do. The key issue there being that they need canopy cover. So I know we're talking about grain markets, but it was just really thought-provoking. I would say that the basis bids in that area of the state, current basis bids, old crop, about $1.20, $1.30 over, but they've been improving for new crop bids. And used to think, well, 30, 40 over, take $1 off, and there you'd be. Well, we've improved over that. Now we're 40, 50, or more cents over D's futures for new crop basis bid.
That's a big carrot for producers right now,
well,
obviously.
Yes. And Of course, it's early. We don't have anything planted. It's pretty dry in that area. All that said, still, you've got some very attractive new crop basis bids for grain sorghum out there. And, of course, it competes with other very attractive basis bids for corn in the same region. So on limited irrigation, you got corn and grain sorghum with its great price being considered. If you have more water available, then you have to consider some of the agronomic issues involved, the quantity of bushels you produce in terms of that would drive kind of what you're doing. Interesting that by the time we crunch through everything, cost of production for grain sorghum, again, we raised it, we lowered it, so you got to forget that, you got to remember this, take that out, you're way too high. By the time all that happened, we ended up on the two moderate to higher yield situations. We were just about 4 to 425, and here the new crop bids are basically about 510, 515.
So it's a paying proposition
there you go, for grain sorghum.
Yeah. Well, to the USDA's first day of its Outlook Forum, which took place yesterday. And among the many things it shared with those who were taking that forum in, the USDA's projection on corn and soybean acreage for the 2021 U.S. crop. Some unexpected numbers there.
Seemed like to me anyway. Still, I sure respect what Seth Meyers, the new chief economist for USDA, and their staff have put out. And what they've put out now is the standard for comparison. It's the first official number that's out there. It's not survey-based, but it's modeling-based, judgment-based, et cetera. They projected corn at 92 million acres compared to about 90.8 last year, up about 1.3%. It was interesting. There was a Farm Futures survey of farmers that came out with feedback. Farmer Tab is an online survey, a sizable number. Farmers that said plus 4%. And there's another industry survey came out, said something not too far from that, 3 to 4. The USDA numbers come out is more conservative than that, basically saying 92 million acres. Probably as much divergence on soybeans as you'd see anywhere. Soybean projection by the USDA, 90 million acres planted. So you corn at 92, soybeans at 90. And that 90 number would be up, depending on who you read and how they calculate, I guess, looks like it's 7 to 8% higher than last year. A recent survey shown the soybean numbers from the farmers and other industry survey that at least I'd seen was 1 to 2%. So it just seems to me that there's a lot of divergence in all this. Of course, what this really sets up is the March 31st prospective plantings report. Then we actually go survey people. We'll see what the farmers say to that survey, and if the Farm Futures or numbers that had come out versus this projection out of the Office of Chief Economist's office, which one is closer to what farmers actually say later on. Yeah. So it does look like by the time you crunch through the numbers, that corn ending stocks number, which is last projected for this marketing year about just a hair over 1.5 billion. By the time you'd follow through with these numbers and USDA's projections, maybe that's closer to 1.8, 1.9. So that number would be going up. On the soybean side, by the time you crunch those numbers and maintain the projection of strong exports, or really this strong competition between crush and exports in the U.S. that's going on as they try to, as they're crowding into the same space against each other. It looks like, again, USDA's last projection, February 9th report, was about 120 million bushels of ending stocks and 2.6% stocks to use. And with this number, it seems like that's maybe just a hair higher, but about in the same mode, about 2.9%, 3% stocks to use. So it's been interesting how they project their prices out of all this. But, you know, you're down to just, I know this overused phrase, but getting the brooms out and sweeping the bins when you're down that low. You're what's left in the pipeline. Now, the USDA also came out with projections for wheat acres at 45 million acres planted. But, you know, this kind of ties in with an issue that you and I have talked about, is on the minds of some, as to, you know, with the weather we've had. I know what the winter wheat plantings are. Question is, what will the spring wheat plantings be? When you look at that drought monitor map, it's pretty dry up in the Dakotas. Almost as dry up there as it is in western third of Kansas. So it'll be really, really interesting to see what happens up in the Dakotas. Any more that, you know, they can grow soybeans, they could grow corn up there. Well, with the high prices we have right now, for these other crops, what will be left acreage-wise for spring wheat acres up there? So it does seem like we're sort of destined to take wheat stocks, which are projected on May 31st to be 836 million bushels, down somewhat. Is it 80 million, 50? Is it 100? All that's in play. And the thing I wonder on is whether the USDA is paying that much attention to wheat feeding or not. And maybe it's just a Kansas thing because it's local and we hear of this discussion, we see what's happening in the prices, we're thinking, gosh, there's got to be some wheat numbers out there that'll show some increased wheat feeding. It sure seems like it has been, but I guess we'll wait for verification.
And as a footnote, the USDA will come out this morning with its grain sorghum acreage projection, so we'll be awaiting that. And in this same Outlook report of yesterday, the USDA took a stab at grain sales abroad, our export prospects.
Well, it's a continuation of where we're at, and it brings up a point that our colleague Guy Allen and I talked about, Guy leading the way yesterday on an Ag Econ seminar that we had, focusing on international markets, wondering about what the internals are of what's happening in China. And coming out of that session, I thought Guy made a great point about how the scale of farms has changed, and that because of the African swine fever that decimated their on-farm small mom-and-pop hog industry, they've gone to much more larger commercial units. I wonder who owns them, but that's another question. Apparently, the mom-and-pop farms that were feeding hogs, they've gone over to chickens, to poultry. So how does grain sorghum fit into feeding poultry over there in China as opposed to feeding corn? And I need to investigate that to make sure I understand it. But if grain sorghum fits into that, maybe there's more explanation there as to what's going on with sorghum demand to China than at least I was very aware of.
Good to talk, Dan, as always, and next week we'll pick up on the latest from the USDA and other grain market factors of influence. Appreciate your time. Have a good weekend.
Thanks, Eric. Take care.
He is Dan O'Brien, grain market economist, K-State Research and Extension, and along with us each Friday here on Agriculture Today.
Did you eat today? Thank a farmer. A way to get more involved in agriculture is through 4-H and FFA. Through 4-H and FFA, we have been given multiple opportunities to grow as leaders and learn more about agriculture.
You can learn skills related to jobs, public speaking skills, and you get the opportunity to travel around the country and meet new people.
If you want more information about getting more involved in 4-H and FFA, visit them on their websites at kansasffa.org and kansas4h.org.
Coming your way now on Agriculture Today, we'll address a question that's been out there the last several days as folks are now waiting and wondering about whether our harsh Arctic plunge has damaged the winter wheat crop in Kansas and the Central Plains. So we turn to Romulo Lollato for thoughts on that. He is a wheat production specialist, K-State Research and Extension. We know that winter wheat can be awfully tough, but one does think about anyway, Romulo, whether our stands did hold up when temperatures dip as low as they did.
Hi, Eric. Yes, well, thank you for having me on air here today. And that has definitely been the talk of the week here. How will the wheat crop fare these extremely cold temperatures that we had during this last week? Will it result in any potential for winterkill? The answer is that, yes, it can result in potential winterkill, but it will depend on several factors, right? Some of these factors, they are related to the conditions of the crop, right? So, for example, has the crop had enough time to get cold hardened? Does it have a good and proper root system developed? And, of course, are there any other damage to the crop, such as insects and pests and things along these lines that can actually make the crop more susceptible to other stresses? And then there are several things from the environment as well that will dictate whether there will be winterkill or not. And those, of course, include the air temperatures, but more importantly, the soil temperatures, right? I think it's a combination of both there. And then what affects that, the buffering capacity to the soil would include snow cover and soil moisture content as well. So those few things, both from the crop perspective and from the weather perspective, will actually dictate whether there will be winterkill or whether the crop will make through these conditions fine.
Well, let's talk further then about air and soil temperature thresholds that likely lead to winter kill, our experiences of the past through research. What do we know along that line?
From a threshold perspective, usually we say that during this time of the year, right, it's when the wheat crop is most cold hardy, of course, depending on development and so on. But it usually can handle temperature in the low teens fairly well as far as soil temperatures go. And if the soil temperatures start getting below the low teens and into the single digits, that's where we actually get concerned and we can start seeing some potential for a winter kill. As far as air temperatures, that's more variable. The crop is actually quite tolerant to the low air temperatures at this point, simply because the growing point is still below ground and we haven't even started developing the tiny little head there at any rate for the majority of the state. So probably low teens to single digits is what we're looking for in terms of soil temperatures.
And from what you've seen from the Mesonet website at K-State, have our soil temperatures plummeted that low?
That was an interesting thing here, Eric. And, if we look at the air temperatures, right, across the state, we had the minimum air temperatures reaching values as low as negative 29 in north central Kansas. And the entire northwest portion of the state was reaching minus 24 to minus 26. So extremely, extremely cold temperatures. If we look then at the soil temperatures, there was variability across the state. If we look at our Mesonet stations, some of them reached very concerning values. Some of them reached 12 to 14 degrees Fahrenheit, which is like on that borderline to actually cause some damage. If they were reaching the single digits, I would be even more concerned. But of course, they were reaching the low teens. Now, interestingly, if we look at the central part of the state, the majority of the soil temperatures in that region, they were maintained above 20, which is a safer place to be. But there was a pocket in central Kansas where there was really not much snow cover. I mean, if we look at the amount of snow cover that we had, that central Kansas, there was a pocket there that didn't have snow cover at all. And in that region, if we look at the Mesonet station there, it reached about 15 or so. So that really tells us that we didn't have a lot of snow, but whatever snow was there helped, right, at least to some extent. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the snow that we had and its potential effects there on these buffering conditions as well. The snow, again, its biggest benefit is that if we have a nice layer of moist snow, say 2 or 3 inches at least or more, usually underneath that snow, it's going to be kept at freezing temperatures. It's going to be kept about 30 degrees or something along those lines, even though air temperatures above the snow might reach to very low values. Now, the snow that we had during this storm, it was actually pretty powdery and dry, so it didn't really bring much moisture, and we didn't have a very deep snow either, right? I mean, the majority of the wheat-growing region in the state got anywhere from 1 to 2 inches. So that's kind of borderline of where we see that buffering occurring. And with as dry as it was, also kind of gets us concerned that the buffering capacity of that snow was not as large as it could have been if it was a more moist snow. Now, if we look at the neighboring states of Nebraska and Oklahoma, they had up to 10 or even up to 20 inches of snow. So they seem to be in much better shape from a buffering standpoint than what we were in Kansas, especially because we were just at that 1 to 2 inches for the majority of the state. Again, seeming that it could have helped with buffering temperatures from a few stations that we have data with and without snowfall.
All right, then, what telltale signs of winter kill damage should the producers be watching for as we thaw out here eventually?
Yeah, so right now there's not much that we can look for, right? Because for many normal conditions, the wheat crop is going to be completely burned back as far as leaves go. So the leaves might be all burned back normally anyways, and that doesn't really mean that we're hurting our yield potential yet. So really for the next 2 or 3 weeks, there's not a whole lot that we can do other than wait. Once the temperatures start warming up and we start having some growth, some spring green up, then that's the time that we need to look for whether the crop is greening up and we see new leaves coming out of each plant. That is a really good sign that the crop made it through fine. Although it's important to note that it can green up and die back again, right? So we're probably looking mid-March before we can actually have a pretty good judgment of what happened. Now, As far as the crop conditions go, it's important for growers to know where to focus their efforts in looking for. This year in the state, we had some very different conditions. Growers that planted relatively early and were able to capitalize on that September rainfall, the crop got off to a good start. And I think it had a good development and a good root development as well that probably helped it make through. Now, a lot of the state got planted relatively late, or not even planted late. It really emerged late because we didn't have moisture conditions for good emergence early on. So for the late emerged crop, it's probably not cold hardened as well as the crop that was planted and emerged earlier. And if you look at percents around the state, out west, we had up to 60% or so of the crop that was emerged by October 10th. So that 60%, I'm more confident that might make it through better. And that's probably those fields that were planted after a long-term fallow that had more moisture in the profile anyways. Now, the other 30-40% out west, they got planted probably after a corn crop, and less moisture in the profile, much less development, and lower yield potential. It's probably much more exposed to Winterkill now as well. Same thing for central Kansas. Crop that got planted relatively early, likely after another wheat crop or after a canola crop, something along those lines, and emerged early as well, might be in better shape. But for central Kansas, that proportion is less, right? We probably have less than 30-40% of the crop that actually emerged by that October 10th. And then there are regions of the state like north central Kansas where 40+% of the crop emerged in November. And so that late emergent crop is really what concerns me more, again, because that plant didn't have as much time to get cold hardened, doesn't have as many tillers out there to make through the winter, and just doesn't have a good root development to help it make through the winter either.
Well, in sum then, Romulo, is it fair to say that, yes, there will be pockets of crop damage, but as far as widespread winter kill throughout the entire scope of the Kansas wheat production area, that's fairly unlikely?
Yeah, I think that's a fair statement, Eric. I think that, if we are to see a widespread winter kill, I would be more concerned with those regions in north central Kansas where the crop was planted late, and in northwest Kansas, especially in those fields that were planted late as well. And that's a combination of a late planted crop, a majority of the crop being planted late, and very cold conditions on those regions, coupled with dry conditions as well, very limited snow cover. Now, for example, south central Kansas, I think we're in good shape there. They got more moisture throughout the season. There was more crop development there as well. So for the most part, not overly concerned with the south central or southeast parts of the state. I think if we are to see more winter kill, I would suspect that we would see those late planted fields, central, north central, and northwest Kansas.
Well, we always manage somehow to test the durability of winter wheat here in Kansas, and this is one more that we've gone through recently with this ultra-cold weather. We shall see what happens, and we would let our listeners know that Romulo has put together some notes on this very topic in the latest e-update newsletter that was posted yesterday. Take a look at that at agronomy.ksu.edu. We'll track the progress of the crop as it eventually breaks dormancy soon, hopefully in good shape. We shall see. Romulo, thank you.
Thank you, Eric.
He's Romulo Lollato, wheat production specialist with K-State Research and Extension. Agriculture Today continues after this break on the K-State Radio Network.
With the shortage of primary care physicians, especially in rural areas, health education and disease prevention are vital. K-State Research and Extension programs address quality of life, personal development, and health behaviors across all life stages of all social-economic groups. To learn more about health education, one of K-State Research and Extension's 5 grand challenges, visit www.ksre.ksu.edu.
You're tuned into Agriculture Today from the campus of Kansas State University. Eric Atkinson here, and on now to today's agricultural news headlines, courtesy in part of DTN. U.S. agricultural trade and sales growth will continue hinging on the growth of sales to China, which the USDA forecasts will hit another record for the fiscal year. The USDA forecasting a boost in sales to China, reaching a record $31 billion for fiscal 21. Total trade overall for fiscal 21 reaching $157 billion. That would be an increase of $21 billion from last fiscal year, about 13% higher for the year. The fiscal year running for 21 from October the 1st to this coming September the 30th, of course. The USDA providing these forecasts as part of the U.S. Agricultural Outlook Forum, which is virtual this year. Now, pointing to the overall income drivers for agriculture, sales of corn, soybeans, cattle, and hogs will remain the leaders there. What is on the books from the U.S. to China, just from the U.S. to China by the end of August, is already way above the tariff rate quota. That's according to USDA Chief Economist Seth Meyer. He said that an expectation is there will be demand continuing for corn and for soybeans as China's swine herd rebuilds. That rebuilding in China also a reason why pork exports to that country have weakened since last year. Again, overall U.S. agricultural exports in the fiscal year expected to reach $57 billion against imports at a record $137.5 billion for a trade surplus of $19.5 billion. That would be $17 billion higher than in fiscal 20, and the biggest trade black ink since fiscal year 2017, when the surplus was $21 billion. Looking at prices, the USDA is forecasting for the 21-22 crop production year, prices at $11.25 a bushel for soybeans, $4.20 for corn, and $5.50 a bushel for wheat. Now, more from that Outlook Forum, a drop in government payments to producers, despite those strong grain prices, will cause a drop in overall farm sector income this year, according to the USDA. Gary Crawford with more.
The nation's farm sector this year will generate less income overall than in 2020, but even so,
I think both the prospects for crops and livestock are good based upon continued strong domestic demand and good exports.
But USDA's chief economist Seth Meyer told the USDA's virtual Outlook Forum that overall net cash farm income this year will be $128.3 billion, down 5.8% from last year. And of course, in 2020, government payments to farmers for COVID and trade-related losses accounted for a big chunk of farm income. Seth Meyer says this year, government payments could be down by over 45%.
And we expect, though, alternatively, that we'll have a sharp increase in cash receipts.
An increase of almost $20.5 billion, so more of farm income will be coming from the market. And as Arkansas Senator John Bozeman told the Outlook Forum, what farmers tell him,
that their goal is always to earn a living from the market, not from government payments.
That could happen this year. Gary Crawford for the U.S. Department of Agriculture.
Once more, that Outlook Forum continues today, and the USDA will be releasing its livestock production and price numbers. We will talk those over with K-State's Glenn Tonzer during our cattle market segment coming on Monday. And members of Congress are urging the U.S. Department of Treasury and the Small Business Administration to issue new clarifications that would make more farmers and ranchers eligible for forgivable loans through the Paycheck Protection Program. But with less than 6 weeks until the application deadline, there's little time for the SBA to change its guidance. When Congress reauthorized the program earlier this year, it changed how farmers calculate their loan amounts, switching from net income to gross income. That change made farmers eligible for much larger payments. However, guidance from the Small Business Administration limited that change to soil proprietors and single-owner limited liability corporations, leaving rules for partnerships unchanged. Coming your way now on Agriculture Today, this week's edition of the Kansas Wheat Scoop. And with that, as always, is Marcia Boswell. Marcia?
From homesteading the Kansas prairie to developing new ways to market products to today's consumers, women have played a critical role in the success of Kansas agriculture. The annual Women Managing the Farm Conference provides a supportive setting for women to develop the skills, resources, and knowledge needed for success in a competitive agricultural environment. From day-to-day decisions to record-keeping and financial management, women are heavily engaged in American agriculture. The ultimate goal of the Women Managing the Farm Conference is to provide women with the tools they need to manage their farm investment and thrive in rural communities. Kansas is home to nearly 32,700 women agricultural producers, according to the 2017 Census of Agriculture. Nationwide, 36% of U.S. farmers are women, and more than half of all farms have at least one female decision maker. The Women Managing the Farm Conference, started in 2005, gathers these women farmers with rural business leaders and landowners for learning sessions and networking. This year in a virtual setting, Kansas Wheat was a gold sponsor for the event. Over the 3-day conference from February 10th through the 12th, sessions discussed personal motivation, tractor and equipment maintenance, urban agriculture and inner-city food deserts, handling stress, entrepreneurship, grain and livestock marketing, family communication, financial management, healthcare, family dynamics, farm succession planning, livestock fencing, direct marketing, and more. The conference kicked off with Matt Rush, an inspirational speaker and author, providing motivation to continue connecting and innovating with others in agriculture. Naomi Bloom, a specialist in helping farmers understand their cash marketing needs, broke down how farmers can better understand and manage their cash flow. Lavelle Windsor, K-State farm analyst, and Robin Reed, K-State Extension farm economist, discussed how to determine the cost of production and strategies for developing and implementing a marketing plan. Mary Kay Thatcher, a former lobbyist for the American Farm Bureau Federation, who is now on the government relations team for Syngenta, provided insights on how the 2020 election will impact the ag industry. New this year, the conference added a digital resource library of videos and materials to help put the ideas in these sessions into action in their operations and daily lives. Combined, these resources will provide support throughout the year for the women who work to continually advance American agriculture. Keep up to date with Women Managing the Farm at facebook.com/womenmanagingthefarm. For Kansas Wheat, I'm Marcia Boswell.
All right, Marcia, many thanks. Well, the numbers are now in on our polar experience over the past week, and we'll talk about those as we're joined shortly by K-State's Mary Knapp. That's after this break. You're listening to Agriculture Today.
When you are in need of timely, reliable, and trusted information, K-State Research and Extension is here. Whether it's organizing people, information, or resources, they have the necessary tools. Community comes first for K-State Research and Extension. For more information and to connect with your county's extension agents, visit www.ksre.k-state.edu.
Closing out this Agriculture Today, our latest look at Kansas agricultural weather, and welcoming back in Mary Knapp, climatologist, K-State Research and Extension. Well, Mary, we know definitively we had record cold temperatures in Kansas. The question is, to what degree this past week?
Well, it was a week for the record books in the week time frame between the 10th of February and the 16th of February. So far, we've noted 331 new records for the coldest high temperatures on those individual dates. Wow. There are undoubtedly more who haven't gotten their reports in yet, but that's where we're at now. And we had, in that same time period, over 150 days where it set a new record for the low temperature. So it was cold. And to give you an idea of how cold, statewide average temperature was under 10 degrees. Oh. And in the Northwest, where they had the strongest cold, their average temperature for the week was just about -1 degree Fahrenheit. That was not the average low. That was the average temperature. So by any measure, it was cold.
And the winner of the frigid sweepstakes, again, was in Jewell County?
Right. In Jewell County, the Lovell Dam report was a -33.
Actual temperature.
Actual temperature. That is not the wind chill. That was the actual temperature. Here in Manhattan, we got down to minus 18, which was kind of almost on the warm side. But they had sub-zero temperatures all the way down into southeastern Kansas, so everybody in the state dropped below zero. And hopefully producers had a chance to look at our new freeze monitor. We went and expanded. Instead of looking just how cold it was for the last 24 hours, we can go up to 2 weeks on that. And so we were documenting, it was cold, and it was very cold.
And if one wants to go and check their general location for that very 2-week stretch of information, mesonet.ksu.edu. Of course, that's still up, that freeze monitor data. The snow amounts accompanying the cold, what did they read?
Well, generally, we were in the lower amounts on each individual day. The cumulative for the week ranged from a couple of inches to as much as 11 inches, and that 11 inches was in Montgomery County in southeast Kansas. So it was just a matter of how much built up over each of the different waves, and pretty much snowed every day during the week, at least in somewhere in the state. Here in Manhattan, again, it was every day, including yesterday when we saw a few flakes before the sun got a chance to get things going, but still it was snow to accompany that cold temperatures. And we did have quite a bit of wind to go with it, so that just increased the problems.
And as Romulo Lollato noted earlier in the broadcast, that snow may or may not have been helpful in blanketing that winter wheat crop.
Right. Unfortunately, in many places, it may not have been deep enough to provide much of it. One note is that the soil temperatures did not drop as precipitously as the air temperatures. The difference will be depending upon whether or not the soils were very dry, and also the soil type will make a difference. If you've got a sandy soil, those will respond more quickly to the colder air temperatures, whereas if you've got a clay soil, that's slower to drop following those cold temperatures. Not to say that it didn't get cold, it did, but it was not the brutal cold that the air temperatures were showing.
And before we get into the outlook, the latest on the drought monitor suggests that despite snows the last couple of weeks, we've still dry regions of the state, for sure.
Right. A couple of things to keep in mind with that. The snow being formed under such Arctic conditions had the Arctic dryness to go along with it. In most cases, you were getting, for every inch of snow, you may have had 1/100th of an inch of liquid equivalent. So even in the heavier snow amounts, you weren't translating into a lot of moisture. We did see some improvements in the drought monitor, cleaned up a little bit of the abnormally dry in northeastern Kansas, where last week they had fairly heavy moisture to go along with this week, and the cold temperatures reduced the demand a lot, so there was improvement there. There was also some improvement in the north central part of the area. Again, they saw significant snows last week and had more again this week, so it was time to improve that a little bit. It's still dry there, but it's no longer quite as dry as it was. In the west, there wasn't much in the way of moisture, and their drought is much more intense. It's going to take more significant rainfall to make any improvement in that area. The only positive note on that is it didn't get worse.
Well, the warm-up has commenced as of today, and as we look at the forecast, we will see incremental improvement in these temperatures for the next several days.
Right, but while it will seem much warmer, given the cold that we're coming out of, it will still be close to normal, if not slightly cooler than normal. As we move further into the period, into the end of February and the 1st of March, things are likely to warm up a little bit more and will be more seasonal and may even be warmer than normal as we start March.
Moisture, though, will be spare for a while, it sounds.
It sounds like it. At this time, they're pretty much calling for no moisture in the quantitative precip forecast. There's a little chance of maybe 1/10 of an inch along the eastern borders of Kansas, but for the most part, this next week is expected to be dry. The 8 to 10 day outlook favors a slight chance for above normal moisture in the east and a slight chance for below normal in the west. And that's not a north-south, east-west divide. It's a diagonal from southwest Kansas to northeast Kansas. If you're south and east of that line, you've got a better chance for moisture. If you're north and west, you've got a lesser chance for getting significant precipitation.
Well, at least we're warmer coming out of the past several days. Mary, thanks, and enjoy your weekend.
Thanks, Eric.
She's Mary Knapp, climatologist, K-State Research and Extension. Our thanks to you likewise for tuning in, and please rejoin us right here on Monday. Until then, Eric Atkinson for Agriculture Today over the K-State Radio Network.